Greetings, travelers. I'm your host, the C Dot that knows a lot, Dr. Waluigi. Last year I covered two of the films from Marvel Comics. One was better than what other people made it out to be, and the other was a hot, swampy shitbag. So this year I thought it'd be a good time to look over at some of the comic book movies from DC. I avoided doing their movies for this long because I found it very difficult to find a movie that I find not as bad as people make it out to be. However, after looking through their catalog, I found one film that fits that description perfectly. And that movie is the 2011 version of Green Lantern. This interpretation on the character of Green Lantern is actually the second version of that character. The original Green Lantern was created in 1940 named Alan Scott, who was a train engineer and gained his powers through a magic Chinese lantern. The character that was made for the movie was a man named Hal Jordan, who was a test pilot for the US Air Force, who comes upon his powers from an alien. I'll explain more of this through the plot. As far as Green Lantern film adaptations go, he hasn't had a very good track record. The concept to make the character's franchise into a movie started back in 1997, which had been stuck in development hell until 2011. Over time, there had been plans to make a Green Lantern film, including one in 2005, which would have starred an original Green Lantern played by Jack Black. However, all of those attempts ended either to lack of funds or lack of interest in creating the character. The movie stars Ryan Reynolds as Hal Jordan, a test pilot who's trying to follow in his father's footsteps after his death during a routine test flight. Meanwhile, an alien named Parallax escapes from his prison and injuring his warden, a Green Lantern named Abin Sur. After he crash lands on Earth, he sends out his ring to find a new successor, choosing Hal. Can he be trained quickly enough to stop the impending doom of Parallax? Which usually isn't a problem, but I feel like the cast chosen come off as out of place in this movie. Out of all the characters, Hal Jordan, played again by Ryan Reynolds, is the blandest and boring character in the movie. Hal is supposed to act like a cocky, womanizing jerk with a heart of gold, but instead Ryan Reynolds plays himself. And for those of us who want to see a proper adaptation of the character, they should have gone with someone who fits that description, like Bruce Campbell or Taylor Kitsch. The other character that I think needed to be changed is Sinestro, played by Mark Strong. While Mark Strong is usually a good choice for a main villain, seriously check him out in the movie Shazam, he too is just going with the motion of the script. In the comics, Sinestro is considered one of the most powerful Green Lanterns, and is only second in terms of fame and power to Abin Sur. He holds his title with pride, and while he can be kind to his fellow Lanterns, he is also cruel and ruthless when the time is needed. If I had to recast him, I would have chosen someone like Kane Hodder or Ron Perlman. They represent more of Sinestro than Mark Strong does. The rest of the cast are really good choices and fit their roles perfectly. I will speak more of the villain on my negative thoughts of the movie. Speaking of which, let's take a look at some positives. Complain about the CG, I honestly didn't get it. I'm not someone who can tell the difference between how well CG ages, but I will say that the CG in this movie looks fine. Considering all of the CG they had to use to make this movie, it could have looked a hell of a lot worse than it did. I will admit though, I wish they had used some practical effects for characters like Sinestro that were more human-like in design. I also think that the villain's lackey is a decent character than what people have been saying about him. Sure, he was pointless, but for the most part, he wasn't as bad as Reynolds or Strong was, and he showed a decent contrast of what Hal could have turned into if he had let his fear control him. this movie suffers from the most is the villain, Parallax, voiced by Clancy Brown. While I don't think that Clancy Brown does a terrible job playing Parallax, he was the wrong villain to be in this movie. One of the biggest reasons why is that he is a major villain in the Green Lantern mythos and is a fusion of this character and another villain, Appa Ali Aspa. I feel like the writers should have chosen a more personal villain for how to fight, someone like Kanjar-Ro or Atrocitus. I know that they tried to make Hector Hammond, played by Peter Sarsgaard, be the villain that is Hal's polar opposite. However, it doesn't work because we don't feel sorry for him. He has a good life and he is a respected scientist. The only bad thing about him is that his dad is a giant dick, which I do find ironic that Tim Robbins is in two different superhero movies that involve the characters coming from space. The only other problem that this movie faces is the writing. I feel like they should have kept the movie like the comic where Hal is on Oa training and learning about his job as a Green Lantern, while also learning about the universe and other aliens. This movie is not the worst put out by Warner Brothers in terms of their comic book movies. I wouldn't even put this in the top 10 worst movies of all time that they've done. But it is clear that the movie needed more time to be rewritten and they should have chosen the right cast members for this movie. Overall, I give this movie a 7 out of 10. Not terrible, but needed more time and effort put into the movie. If you're still looking for a good Green Lantern movie, check out Green Lantern First Flight. It's the best introduction story you will find about Green Lantern and fixes a lot of the problems that I felt were in this movie. Well, that's all for now. Until next time, I'm Dr. Waluigi, and remember, don't judge a book by its cover, 'cause you'll never know what's inside.